Welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me once again this week, the graceful insider to my clumsy interloper, it's Brian.
Hey, Scott, how you doing? And do you mind if I talk to you awkwardly about your deceased father?
Hey, guys. No. Oh, my Lord. We are here once again this week to talk about, possibly all the best TV series HBO has to offer right now. No dragons need apply here. As always, check the segment breakdown if there's anything you don't watch and you prefer to skip so you can save your valuable time trying to figure out, what streaming services are starting to add up to more than that cord you claim you cut or something. I don't know. Based on my recent cable bill, it's probably never going to happen as far as I'm concerned. So let's get right to the first show on the docket tonight, and that would be Succession, which again hits us with a title that's kind of relating to Connor's nuptials, even though this episode has very little to do with that. But the metaphor for what these two words here work just right for the real plot and theme of this installment. For the title is Honeymoon States. And just how long does, or did, the honeymoon last between constantly sniping factions as well as those who have rarely been in spoken opposition to each other? It's something that's hit upon a number of times throughout the proceedings of this episode, whether it be between family members or work partners, colleagues, and so on. So when the episode opened, I'm pretty sure it's the very next day. That's my take on it, right, Brian?
It is the next day, yes.
That's what I thought. Because we open the next day and, boom, look, Kendall's depressed. Oh, there's a shock. Roman is very matter-of-factly going through the morning rituals of brushing his teeth. But I think that's almost a bellwether for the way he's going to be in this episode, where all of a sudden I realize they should have like a subtitle under him, so the series can go from being called Succession to Suppression, because that's what Roman does in this episode, I think.
Yeah, he's tightly wound and managing it by pretending to be normal and dealing with a routine and like he's over it.
Exactly. And of course, our third Roy, Shiv, we see her in bed and she gets a call from her doctor. And that's when we find out that she's actually several weeks pregnant. Now, should we and can we assume that the bun in the oven, the baker, is Tom? And maybe this happened before everything kind of went south for them. And maybe that is really what's truly adding to her stress level as far as their impending divorce, aside from all the power and the money, whatever. The fact there's a kid in the mix.
I think that's the implication. But with this show, who knows?
That is true. Very true. So Kendall arrives at I never know what to refer to it, because it's not a house, it's a building, I don't know, the mansion, the townhouse. Maybe it's a townhouse. It might be a townhouse. It could be a townhouse. Okay. Anyway, Kendall arrives there, and I love the fact he's walking by Hugo, and you hear Hugo's on the phone with Juliet, mouthing off about getting, first curse of the night on the podcast, getting fucked in the ass, whatever. And I love that. Any other show you think, that's just thrown in as just kind of like a little character shading and fun. And the fact in this episode, nope, that's actually going to be very important. And I love that little seed is planted here, and it's going to grow a little bit later on, and then it's going to get uprooted in a really diabolical fashion by the end of the episode. I love the way things are sprinkled and tracked throughout this episode.
If there's any doubt that this is a dark comedy, the people that just think of this as a drama and don't think the writers are having a ball with this stuff, I mean, what's more classic to comedy than a callback?
Oh, yeah.
And this is like, the ultimate callback that comes at the end of the 1 hour set that goes back to something early in the episode. So I really like that too.
Yeah, and just so we can plant the seed ourselves, and kind of weird to be talking about planting the seed considering A, the context of this conversation, and B, the fact that we're just talking about Shiv being pregnant. But anyway, I should mention that one of the other lines Hugo has on the phone, and again, we don't know who he's talking to at this point. When we find out who he's talking to, it's even worse. But one of the things where he first, other than being fucked in the ass, he does refer to being a strap-on being used, I believe. So which is kind of important, although we would never have thought so in the first few minutes of this episode. But what is really important, and I think we might have referenced it in a previous podcast, which I think is our running line in every podcast we do nowadays, Marcia is back.
Yeah, I was glad to see her.
Now, a lovely little touch. I'm sure every single viewer caught it and kind of went, haha, that's nice. Because Kendall's the first one to run into her. And I love that he starts to say, where have you? Then he switches to, when did she get in?
Yeah.
He starts to say it, the thing that everyone is thinking, and not just people there. The viewers are like, what happened to her? But he shifts, and then he gets the answer of how her realizing the obvious questions that are going to be in the air, but she goes right into how they spoke every morning and afternoon. She came as soon as she heard, and then she basically buttons their relationship as it was complicated, but they spoke intimately. Oh God, every evening. I gotta say, seeing Marcia again, I think one almost forgets how the actress, and her name is, I think it's Hayam Abbas, how she could be such a withering badass on this series. And then you're reminded why her pairing with Logan actually made so much sense. That she might be a little bit more subtle at times with her put downs, but she can be just as nasty and mean as her husband can be.
Yeah, and she actually understood and played the game with Logan and with the rest, and actually showed some skill at playing the game when we saw her in the past. And she could do it without a lot of the gruff exterior and some of the character flaws that a lot of the other characters have.
Right. And as a result, what probably makes her character such an interesting one, and actually the kind of power that she actually always had, unlike a Logan, she's very easily underestimated. I think she's constantly been underestimated by them throughout the series, and even going into this episode, when you realize there's a lot more going on with Marcia than y'all want to give her credit for. So the next several minutes of the episode pretty much ping pong back and forth between the Roys and what I like to call the work cabal. So you know what? Let's just bounce back and forth with them. Now, since we just were talking about Marcia, we got to go there. I love. After there's an initial embrace once again between the Roys, but unlike the last time, which was filled with they were genuinely upset and sad and stricken, there's maybe a little bit of that here. But really, what they want to do is talk about Marcia being back, and they all get their little snipey comments, and other than the obvious thing like death becomes her. But I love when they start to speculate where's Carrie, because that's a question hanging over all this with Marcia being back in town, and that's when Roman throws out a line which was my runner up for may use it for the intro tonight, but I went simpler instead. When he says, oh, she's in Marcia's trunk, inside an anaconda, inside a sarcophagus.
Yeah.
And the thing with Roman, I mean, obviously, lines like that are par for the course with him more than any other character in the entire series. So he's always, both witty and raunchy at the same time. But they also go right to what we were saying before about how he's suppressing his feelings. And I think a lot of that is because of how raw and open we saw him in the previous episode. So it's in this scene where they talk about when they are still talking about reaction to their father's death. And then later they talk about the world's reaction and the media's reaction. But as we were saying before, he's in suppression mode. So he talks about how he's always been prepared for this. So he's pre-grieved. Yeah. That, you know what? I want dictionary.com in a couple years. If they can get Stephen Colbert's, truthiness or whatever that was years ago added to the lexicon of actual words. If pre-grieved isn't already a word, I'm assuming it's not. It deserves to be. It sounds like it should be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like to think of Roman as a person who his coping mechanism is the equivalent of what I do in my profession, and that is, it's he almost has a gallows humor to everything to sort of protect his psyche. And Kendall has his transcendental meditation, and Shiv has her, being a boss and being steely in those moments. His thing is really to deflect with dark humor.
I would say, I mean, that's absolutely true. I would also go further and say Shiv also dabbles in gallows humor. The difference between her and Roman, generally speaking, is, and she does it in this episode, in fact, and it's not the first time, but it's definitely apparent in this episode. She'll say something, and then she does the reverse of when, what's the line that people use right before they hit you with something really harsh,
Oh, the with all due respect, but
Yeah, that kind of a thing. Which I wish I hadn't, because I'm actually going to use that line later. But you know what I mean. It's a Seinfeld episode thing where I just can't remember what it was. Shiv does that in reverse, where she'll say the thing, and then she'll be like almost sort of kind of apologize for it immediately, but then she goes right back to it again.
right,
It's like, oh, that's a horrible thing to say, but now I'm going to say something even worse. That's her style.
right.
I also love her phrasing especially when she sees Tom, and I love that Tom has that brief moment where it's like he's caught in between, where it looks like there's the room with the Roys and there's the room with the work cabal, and it's like, oh, which way is Tom going to go? And we're all like, well, you got to go with the work thing. You've been cut out of this mix for a while, dude. But she refers to the whole thing as the Carnation Demolition Derby. I was like,
Yeah,
why? I just loved how that rolled off the tongue there. So yes, and I should be more specific, that work cabal or office cabal, whatever you want to call them, the Waystar gang, whatever. It's Carolina, it's Jerry, it's Frank, and it's Carl. Because obviously, with after Logan's death, they're going to be in communication with the overall board in picking a new top dog, a new CEO for the company. And the person that they sort of kind of defer to a certain degree in the room, although there's not a lot of deference between these people, is Frank. And and the really funny moment for me is Frank, when he's trying to play it just to have a somewhat more private conversation about it, when he goes, would anyone care for a look at the china? To go in that other little room where, and maybe it's where the actual china closet is or whatever. Meanwhile, in the very other room, you've got Roman throwing out, kind of a truth, where he says, he was going to fire half that room.
yeah,
And that's right around that time, king of the awkward, Greg pops in. And then when he says, my guys, my lovely guys.
yeah.
And I'm like going, oh my God. Oh, just every moment with Greg is just so, it's interesting how in many ways he's changed. And yet at the end, I don't want to say end of the day yet again, but I'm going to do it anyway. He's still floundering. He's still the awkward outlier, outsider, everything else amongst all of them. I just think sometimes he might be aware of that, and he kind of tries to use it to his advantage. His aw shucksness is kind of a facade to a certain degree, as we saw him with what he did with the documents and other things before, and the way he was asking about certain women. But speaking of women, when Roman says you need to get a new mommy, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
jeez. And then of course he channels his own dad, although Papa Roy was not the only person to use that phrase over and over. He does tell him to fuck right on off.
Well, the thing about Greg, and he illustrates even in this scene, is Greg is like a fine looking pair of khakis that is with all the other khakis in your closet. But for some reason, when you put them on, they just don't feel right. Like, like they're just uncomfortable, and you just don't like the way they feel on you or the way they fit.
The pleat's a bit off.
Yes.
They tent when you sit down, and it looks like something's going on when it's not. I know exactly what you mean, which is why I don't like khakis and I never wear them. Was that TMI? Nah. Anyway, so so one of my and this is an episode that's peppered with like all these little great little moments that I really adored, and one of them is an unexpected one for me. Speaking of that work cabal, the really spicy sniping between Carl and Jerry, about the interim position, and especially and Jerry, it doesn't shock me as much, but Carl in this overall episode, he is in rare form. he is dishing out the insults and takedowns as well as I've ever seen him, and probably better than I've ever seen him. And his best one, we gotta go with when he gives an honest evaluation of Tom to his face, no less.
Yeah.
When he calls him, let me say I have it all here. He's seen as a clumsy interloper. The only guy pulling for him is dead. And now he's just married to the ex-boss's daughter. And she doesn't even like him. So he is fair and squarely fucked.
Yeah.
And I went, wow, I've gotten more respect for Carl from this episode than I did from the previous 3 seasons plus.
It's kind of funny that Carl is a perfectly happy minion, but in a vacuum of power, boy, do his teeth come out.
Mm-hmm. I'm always going, wow, that dude used to be Sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And then I realized there's probably like three or four people listening who even remember what Sledgehammer was. Anyway, and a little while ago, when Roman had told Grant to go fuck off, one of the reasons was they were also getting ready for a possible call, either to or from Matsson or Matsson's people, apparently, because you still have to worry about the whole Waystar sale deal going on. So they get this guy on it, but it's Oscar, who is Matsson's guy, but it's obviously not Matsson himself. And we realized through the phone call, not the most empathetic dude. I'm talking to these people whose dad, the patriarch, just has less than 24 hours ago died. He's kind of really being dickish about and forcing the situation about when and where to meet, and not really trying to be in any way convenient for the people who are, still need to worry about, burying their dad.
But Scott, he's at a retreat.
Well, right. And, it's a retreat, man. Plus,
it's a retreat.
So then we get a few little fun moments of I love the awkwardness of Greg and Marcia, which is just the fact that Greg is doing whatever he can to try to like suck up to her, because he sees her. I think he's seeing after what happened, especially with the other 3 Roys and everything. It's like, all right, I need an in somewhere, and that's around this point when Connor and Willa show up. I love the little exchange between Willa and Marcia.
Yeah.
And we gotta give it to Willa on this one, because there's the not so passive aggressive or whatever you want to call it comment that Marcia makes, where she essentially says, "Congratulations, look how far you've come," and she's like, "Wow, look at us both."
Yeah. Wow, look at what we both married into.
And the next thing, and it's going to be funny because I'm going to be making a reference to this also on the next series we're going to be talking about in this podcast. One of the shocking moments for me was the little homage. They make a Deadwood style deal to buy the house. Connor and Marcia do, I mean. Spit on the hand and shake. Straight out of Deadwood. And then I remembered, hey, you know what? Brian Cox was actually on Deadwood, if I'm not mistaken. He's the acting troupe, wasn't he part of that? Yeah,
he was Mr. Langrish.
Look at you remembering the name. Holy crap. So the moment that happened, I was like, wow, Deadwood? Is HBO getting into self-referencing now? Nicely done. Yeah, he Connor, for whatever reason, wants to buy the house. He throws out a number between 60 and 70. She goes in at 63. Wow, okay, done. Now we get to some of the kind of the fun plotting and where it leads to some not so much fun moments. You've got first it's initially Frank and Carl, but then Jerry, joins them. It's all about this document, this paper they found in Logan's safe. Now, in the moment as we're watching this, obviously the viewer, we can't help but speculate, wait, did he actually name someone? And when Carl references Little Princess, there was a moment I thought they were going to be talking about Shiv, but then it occurred to me, the way Carl has been so acidically funny this entire episode, he's got to be talking about Kendall. Which is who it is. And if this is Carl from like last season, I'm thinking it's got to be Shiv. But
yeah, and this whole plot, as it started, went in a really different way than I thought it was going to.
Oh, yeah.
Like the initial, hey, let's talk in hypotheticals of what could happen about this piece of paper. That what it says clearly is not what they love to hear. So they start saying, it could disappear. And then I love when Jerry walks in and says, what are you doing? And they say, well, there's this paper. And, we were just talking about what would happen if it just disappeared. And I love that whole conversation. But what it leads into surprised me. And that, like, then what happens after that is really straightforward. And we kind of see maybe the most unironic bit of truth told between all these people in a room in a long time.
Right. Interesting.
And it makes me wonder if in the moment of possessing that and seeing Logan's handwriting and knowing it's his, that at least something in all of them does want to honor the man.
It's hard because that doesn't ever seem to be what's really the first thought for these folks. I don't know if that's how much they, at the end of the day, I said it again. Holy crap. Okay. That's my bad catchphrase for the evening, I see. But at the end, it's even in my fucking notes. I just wrote that. My notes are about Jerry both smartly and a twee bit desperately points out it's really not likely to be germane because at the end of the day, this is solely up to the board.
Yeah.
All right. I cannot use those words anymore. But yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and it's going to get really. We'll further those entanglements when we get there, and which is pretty darn soon, actually. Because there's a few little things that happen here, so they're more like little fun little tasty little bits for us to chew on before we get to where it starts to heat up again. And that's the thing, whether it be Connor and Willow walking around talking about buying the place and Connor actually interacting with his siblings. There's that moment about, I have a great grief guy, and, I love that. Yeah, and the response, it's when someone says fuck you, but they meet it with a smile. It's kind of nice. And they're all talking about, the obits that are going around about their dad and what they actually mean. But even though that is interrupted briefly, and here's that important little plot point that we got from the beginning of the episode. A little conversation is had, a private conversation, which the folks in the room kind of react to. It's like, why are we having a private conversation just with him? And we find out about that phone call. And we find out that the Juliet person that Hugo is talking to is actually his daughter, which makes you go, ooh. And it turned out he had kind of maybe said something to his daughter about selling Waystar stock pretty much well before Logan's death actually got made public. I'm pretty sure everyone watching realized that's not a good thing.
Right.
That's bad. But, it's kind of like, it's handled in a, don't worry about it, that kind of way. But you realize, okay, they're planting a pole here, they're planting a pole there. I wonder if there's going to be a third pole later on. Yes, there will be.
Yeah, but I see this as, at the end of the episode, when I went back and looked at my notes, I reflect on this as the first sign that Kendall is moving in the direction of his father.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is the very first sign where Hugo's messed up. He comes to Ken, and this is almost like the end of season one of what his dad did to him.
Exactly.
Like somebody's in trouble, and he sort of jokingly threatens them, but, hey, we're going to, I'm going to help you get out of this. But it's to keep that person close to him and exert power over him.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you see, that's the first breadcrumb we don't realize where it's going.
Right.
telling you where Kendall ends up at the end of the episode.
It's the first bit that leads to that we don't realize.
Yes.
I would say but what actually happens would constitute the second thing, because it's obviously the overall decision before that would be the first thing, which is taking to use Shiv's words in a previous episode, basically taking a page from their father's playbook is what Kendall does at the end of this episode in the first place. I don't. And of course, I do want to spend more time on the important stuff like that, but I can't let the fun stuff pass, because the code word scene in the article between them and what they're talking about is maybe one of the funniest things in the entire episode. Especially when they start to define what each term means in the old bitch, what they're really saying, and the best one, the one that made the least sense to me, which made it the funniest, was the translation of connected. Oh, that really means pedophile. Although we never suggested you fuck a child. And Kendall, he wouldn't even hug his grandkids.
Yeah.
And I was going, oh, they are setting each other up. And it's wow, they are a comedy team when they can team up on somebody else, even if it's their dead father.
Yeah, I love this scene. It's like perverse English teachers diagramming a sentence. Like this is what that statement means. That's what that statement means. And believed in security. Strong border security. Racist.
Yes, exactly.
So I love how they just sort of cut through the code words.
It was great. That's around that moment. That's when Tom pops in again, much to everyone's, and he basically telling that they, as in, that office cabal, want to see you up in the library. We do get this little brief moment between Tom and Kendall and Tom keeps pressing the case that, he's just here to serve. He's trying to be, the nice guy and whatever. He's trying to make sure, he's trying to smooth feathers wherever he can. And I just like Kendall's response is simply, I like you, Tom. Good luck. That's it. And it made me think, because I haven't done a rewatch. I just haven't had the time. I haven't had time to watch anything lately except these couple shows. I don't really ever think of Kendall and Tom interacting much on the series for the previous 3 seasons. I just can't think of it. I mean, I'm sure they have in some way, but it's one of the more rare interactions, if anything. Again, unless I'm forgetting something.
I think they've had some interactions, but they've been largely superficial.
Yeah, I mean, family get-togethers and words spoken, but beyond that, really not. So we get to that document, and we realize that at some point in time, after the fact, Logan had actually named Kendall as his successor. Although as they look at the document and they start realizing this probably happened possibly as long as 4 years ago, and you have all these addendums written in pencil on this, there's no indication it was witnessed by anybody else. There's nothing notarized. There's nothing suggesting there's actual legal value to the document, or at least that's the case everyone not named Kendall in that room is pressing, which is totally fair and reasonable to say, because I think I and most would probably agree with that. However, it's when Shiv takes a look at the document, and she also points out the fact you can't tell for sure whether Kendall's name has been underlined or has it actually been crossed out. And she's clearly saying it in a way where she's leaning towards crossed out. And that's when I realized, oh, you know what's happening right now? This is what I'm going to like to call respectful sniping.
Yes.
And this is to go with what you had said earlier. And I almost wish I'd tell you what I'm going to say later, because I won't, don't say it now. Because I feel every line in this scene could be preceded by, with all due respect. Everything they say should be going, with all due respect. That's how that whole scene felt to me. As opposed, I'll say one more thing that'll let you get your jimmies in here. Jimmies, what does that mean? Sprinkles or they're privates, I don't know. As opposed to someone getting zero respect. And that would be Greg. When he's called in, because apparently his name appears on the document, but, just his name with a question mark.
Yeah. I love that detail. And then, of course, in his Greg Way, he tries to spin it in the most positive possible light, and sounds like a complete moron.
Oh,
It's painful.
there. There's one. This is one of those shows, as we know, really excels at the painfully awkward moments and whatever. And let's face it, at least half of them usually involve Greg, and the rest are usually like, Kendall on a binge or something.
I believe it's possible that Greg is like the bastard child of Michael Scott. He's so painful.
Yes, yes. Except maybe not as smart, which is
Not as smart as Michael. He could never make a sale.
No, not at all. So after at least most of the folks file out of the room, it's just Kendall and Frank. And as we may recall, these two, they've had a history of allying together, and then there's always been subsequent fallout to their collaborations or whatever. But it's a surprisingly emotional moment for Kendall to have with someone who's not a member of his family, even though he's probably known Frank for so many years. You could say he's like family. And one of the touches and again, this is probably the case with previous seasons as well. It's just we never podcasted about them, so I don't remember for sure. It's the short, abbreviated use of words that say so much, and they're doing that with Kendall, and I really, really adore that. That to me, that is the best writing I see on this series or most other series. When he says something simply as, "He made me hate him, and then he died." And even as Frank is trying to counter that, you're like, I feel like he didn't like me. I disappointed him.
Yeah.
That sums up he sums up his entire relationship with his father, probably since the point of, if not childhood, then at least from adulthood on.
Yeah.
It's really something.
Yeah, and I thought this was my favorite moment in the episode, because when you first encounter the document, you find out Frank's been named the executor.
Right.
I think stealthily, Frank is probably the closest thing to Logan having a real friend that he actually had, and is the closest with the kids to somebody they consider something more than just a business acquaintance. And it makes sense when you see this scene to think that Logan named Frank the executor. And he has the words with Kendall, and I made a note because I liked it so much. He said, "He was an old bastard and he loved you." Like, that those two things can both exist at the same time.
Right.
And I thought both of them in this scene really distilled down the core of Logan and of Kendall and their relationship in a way that, like, in 1 minute, it was just really, really great. Really, really great writing. And you see almost Kendall being a little boy talking to Frank, and Frank trying to console him. And then, Kendall tries to even enlist Frank's help at the end.
Right. Because he says, "If I can get them in behind me, will you follow?" And I just love that Frank, often when characters speak to each other on Succession, and it's like they're trying to, in a way where it seems on the surface they're sympathizing, empathizing, whatever izing you want to call it, and trying to be human and looking out for the other person, but it happens so very rarely. It always seems more about ulterior motives, and they really have something else, in mind with beyond what their words are saying. But when Frank says to him that, because Frank has seen how Kendall, how he hit, rock bottom not that long ago, and how even just the stuff he's doing with his other siblings and with the Pierce communication stuff and yada, 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 and just he's in a better place. You've got stuff cooking. Do you really want back in? You seem so well. You're not dealing with your addiction issues now, So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. And then we cut right from there to a staircase where, and a lot of things happen on that staircase in this episode. Meanwhile, no one's looking for Cecil B. DeMille. Don't know why. We have Shiv and Roman having a conversation, and this is what I'm talking about with Shiv, where she says, part of me is like, well, let's give the poor little orphan what he wants. and then she almost tries to walk that back, but then she presses forward just as much, whatever. And she's going about, hey, but this is, the thing between all three of them and how they've been working together. This has felt good, but does that feel good?
Right.
The funny thing is when you have the conversations that are happening, whether it's between the Roys or it's between the work cabal, at some point someone always mentions, well, bear in mind, this is just an interim thing. Because once that supposed sale that everyone supposedly wants to go through happens, it's extremely unlikely whoever the interim whoever the interim CEO is going to remain in that position. Because, of course, Lucas is going to want to put someone else in. Why would he? I mean, he has no he might say otherwise, but does anyone think he would keep any of these people there? I don't think so. A corporate stooge or a family whose brand name has gone bad, why would he do that? It makes no sense. So it's weird that how they're all jockeying for that. If at the end of the day they're still, I said it again. Wow. If they're still adamant about getting that sale done.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't buy the Yankees and keep the old manager. You hire the manager you want, and so there's no way one of them's going to keep that position. But I mean, if you think back to what Connor said, what's the last thing you could do to, even if you can't get your dad's approval, you can be the person that ran his company. Like,
that's true.
You can be the one that ascended to that height and at least have that. And I think all of them want that in some degree. And I like, there was, to me here on the staircase, we have this this is almost like a West Wing sort of thing where we have like two characters start out the scene and then one walks away and two more continue.
Yep.
And then Shiv continues down the staircase into the next room. It reminded me a lot of something you'd see on the West Wing. They used to call it the walk and talk, but we do stop on the staircase for significant. But I found it interesting that there's this talk of the concern that what they'd done actually killed him.
Right, which is where we're going right now, because that's what happens when Tom appears on the stairs. And at first, Shiv is kind of goes into super caustic mode towards him. And again, knowing especially what we know from not just previous episodes with, the betrayal, but now about the pregnancy, which, if anything, we know he doesn't know about. But you can see how it fuels her that much more, that we can now read into these words that much more. And the fact that she would say something about someone, and she's still referring to her father, who again is less than 24 hours cold, as far as I'm concerned, can tell here. And she says how he picked the wrong horse, a dead horse, which is like, geez. And then she goes into thinking how we killed him. Now, here's the thing with that little bit about that whole we killed him and talking about their situation. Few things about that. Number one, she doesn't believe that. I'm sorry. She does not believe that. I believe she's saying that just to screw with Tom. Because Tom keeps getting the upper hand on her and whatever. And now with the information she got this morning from her doctor, that's not going to get any better for her. So this is her. I feel this is her lashing out at him, just get at least scoring some points off him while she can, because things are not going well as far as her. Although things aren't really going well for Tom either, with Logan being dead. So but there's still a divorce, and there's still what he can do. So that's still there, and it's interesting because the main takeaway from the scene, for me at least, is she's so angry. And we haven't even gotten to the stuff which is going to make her even angrier later on.
Right.
She's so angry. And even when Tom tries the bit about he's going down memory lane about, how they met and everything else. And one can question whether he's being truly sincere or not. I one can choose to interpret it either way. I like that you can go either way on that. Is Tom really being serious and sincere here and really feel this way, or is he doing this just to try to calm her down, to smooth things over, to get an in or whatever? Either way, it doesn't even remotely work. It does not work, which I thought was like, I don't think any of us thought this was going to change between them, but if things do warm up between them, that might be the most shocking development of the season. We'll see.
No, but it does have that advantage of using a device that we don't see much on this show, that we've talked about on other shows, and that is this show, we always know what's going on.
Right.
And the characters are always informed and are guessing about what other people. This scene, we know something Tom doesn't know.
Right.
And so watching it adds a dimension of sadness to it from our perspective, that we're aligned emotionally with Shiv in the scene because we know what she's going through.
Right.
And I believe all the things she says. I think you're right, but I think it's more than that. I think she is lashing out. But I also think she's almost sort of just thinking out loud, brainstorming all this because of just the wave of emotion she's having about that news this morning, dealing with the idea of, her dad being dead and trying to deal with how the company is going to be settled. I don't know that it was as tactical maybe as you think it was, but I think she's definitely saying something to talk about emotions without talking about what the real emotions are inside of her, which is she has this baby now.
Right. Yeah, I guess with a show like this, I rarely think any dialogue is spoken by any character that doesn't have additional ulterior motives and tactics behind it, unless that character is otherwise inebriated or drugged or whatever. But if they're in possession of their faculties as normal, it's just the way I view the show and view the characters and how they're all in their little box, ripping each other apart all the time, regardless of how they actually feel about each other. But that's just how I choose to interpret it.
Yeah.
So we get an array of these little bits of facts of things that are happening in this episode and laying groundwork for what might be going on in the next episode, or we won't see it all. So little things happen. Colin, the security dude, shows up, and I love that they're joking about that he's wearing jeans, and then one of them realizes, wait, he has a kid?
Right.
And you realize this is someone who's probably been, they've been seeing this dude probably for the last 10, 15, who knows how many years, as their dad's, right-hand security dude, and they don't even know he has a kid.
Well, what's funnier is we've seen a few times, they've worn jeans, but they can't believe the security guard's not in a suit. Like, because he's never worn jeans in their presence.
Oh, yeah.
He's never let his hair down. And they're shocked to see him without jeans.
Oh, it's like, I always liken it. It's like seeing your teacher at the grocery store. It just your brain doesn't compute it that well.
Right.
They also see that someone showing up with what looks like a drug sniffing dog or something, but it's actually a dog with the Secret Service, because it turns out that Jared Mencken, who I believe was the presidential candidate that we were dealing with, but now I think he's a DA on Perry Mason anyway. That he's going to be showing up. We also get a different Politico who does show up, Stephen Root. I had forgotten that Stephen Root has been on the show before. Stephen Root's been on every show at some point in time.
Oh my God, yeah.
He's the character Ron Petkus, who I think was like one of the main GOP party dudes, kind of like kind of helping to pick whoever the next candidate is, one of those kind of guys. We also get a few others showing up. Oh, there's Sandy, and there's with her dad, Sandy, with that weird. Is he smiling or does he just look like that because of the stroke and whatever? Which is so perfectly creepy and great. I love that little touch. And of course, and Stewie is also with them. But we get to a moment. I'm gonna say it might be. I'm thinking if I'm right about this. Let me think. Yeah, I'll say it is until proven otherwise. The next little scene I think might be the most painful scene in the entire episode, and that's the Carrie scene.
Well, hang on before you go there. There's a couple of things a couple of loose ends I want to tie up.
Go on.
Because the kids earlier had their version of sniping at Logan. It's during this eulogy that we get Tom and Greg taking shots at Logan, and as he's eulogizing, they're sort of adding their commentary, which is the mirror of what the kids did earlier.
Right.
And that's a fun little scene. Because that's a callback to a happier time with Greg and Tom, where the family did something or whatever, and they would comment on the side. And I love this line. That this was one of my favorite lines when the eulogy's going on. Connor, like the kids are all singing about it, and Connor comes in outraged and says they can't do this. They're trying to body snatch him. Like he was never I think he says he was never a neocon. Right. Or whatever, but like Connor says, they're trying to body snatch him. I love that line, and that's what he focused on. They were trying to co-opt his dad to stand for something he didn't believe he stood for.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we see happen a lot with figures from the past, where suddenly they seem to be, revisionist thinking puts them in a light that maybe isn't true to who they actually were. And I think Connor, especially with his own still some political aspiration, whatever, doesn't want his father tainted in situation, because obviously that also bleeds onto him as well, I think.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's funny. I made no notes about those scenes, so I'm glad you brought them up. The Carrie scene, however, and again, I'm not going to recount the whole thing. We all remember and saw what happened. What's interesting is that Roman is actually the most human person there. They're shocked, there's laughs, there's whatever. Although I will say this, Greg is a total douche during the whole scene, but it's also understandable why he's a douche during the whole scene, because we've commented on it before. We've seen how horribly Carrie has treated him and spoken to him a number of times before this. If there's one guy who's probably not going to be very sympathetic to her plight and maybe even revel in it a bit, it's going to be Greg, and which also then makes his little kind of sidling up to Marcia make so much more sense, because other than himself, the other person in this entire house who's going to really detest her the most is, of course, it's going to be Marcia, of course. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I didn't think of that earlier in the episode when he's first, chatting up Marcia, and then when this scene happened, I'm like, oh, gosh darn it, they're so smart.
You just wanted Greg to say, "Who's the string cheese now?"
I got some dipping sauce. All right, so after this, and again, if I skip something that you might have more notes on, feel free to bounce back to it. But I just have it as just after some brief and either plaintive or pointed interactions we get between Kendall and Shiv, and Roman and Tom. Not to mention we get Kendall trying to rally Stewie back to his side again. And by the way, Stewie is a really funny fucking prick in this episode. I gotta give the guy credit.
Absolutely.
It's like wow, he's usually going after metahumans in the Marvel. Anyway.
Well, before we get there, there are a couple of things I want to break down.
Go.
Tom makes his next attempt to sidle up to one of the, and my favorite line is Roman calls him Tiptoe Tommy.
Yes.
Roman doesn't engage in any niceties. He just ruthlessly mocks him for being an opportunist. So Tom's failed there. But I thought this was curious that they actually do tell us then how he died. They actually tell us he had a pulmonary embolism. And that's when Kendall and Stewie are talking before everybody sort of comes in. And I thought that was a nice touch that, that's disclosed to us that that's what happened to him.
But was it as nice as learning that maybe he dropped his phone in the toilet on the airplane and him trying to fish his phone in the toilet?
Well, that came from
The Tom and Greg conversation during the orgy. So finally, Kendall is able to corral his two main siblings together with a, can we talk kind of a thing. And the Roys talk. And they talk. And ultimately, the brothers come to push the idea of it being the two of them. Because, three is simply one too many. And we get this little unusual alliance of Kendall and Roman. Shiv is understandably worried. They make their case for for the pros and cons of each person, but it seems in their at the end of it, wow, I went there again. They come to decide that it makes the most sense for it to be the Kendall and Roman. Now, whether we the viewer agree with that stance, I don't know about that. But the old guard before the board vote, they all get their shots in. I also love that Stewie insists on staying, and we don't know. It's like, oh, that's a curious decision. But then when he pipes in, it's like going, oh, he puts it right here. Wow, he actually might be a good ally to have for a change.
Yeah.
So then when all is said and done, which is better than saying at the end of the day, Ken and Roman are announced as are they co-CEOs? Is that how they're
yes.
Okay, so it's not a CEO and a COO kind of thing. They're both CEO, okay, or co-CEO or whatever. While that announcement is happening, as they all walk out, Shiv simply walks off. She's not going to stand there like a moron during all this, and she marches past Marcia downstairs, and that's when she trips on those little couple stairs that lead into, I guess, like the parlor room. Did you gasp when that happened? Because
yeah.
I mean, it's a great touch. It's a great touch because it's so. What's the word I'm looking for? Not discombobulating. It's unsettling. That's what I'm.
Yeah.
Because if she just walks up and she's just plain angry and she's starting they could have went so cliche. And I love, as I've said before, I love the show avoids that. We don't get Shiv walking into a room and throwing something or smashing something or anything like that, or just seething, whatever. The almost fall down the stair thing. Plus, we also know that she's several weeks pregnant, which makes us go even more.
Right.
It's just a great, smart little touch, like many in this episode.
Right, and the symbolism in the show, like, Tom caught between two worlds, the cinematography. I mean, like, Shiv's off balance and she's lost her balance. And, it's a great visual representation in that moment of where she is in her head.
Right. She's it's almost like you've lost your standing with the situation, and you almost did, or when you lost your footing.
Right. So
then Roman, Kendall go into what I believe it's their dad's office. At the home, and that's and Carolina and Hugo are there as well. So you realize that sometimes I get a little fuzzy on what everyone's specific job responsibilities are. I mean, I know Carolina is always very involved with communication, so she is what comms. Hugo apparently is as well. That's the one I used to get confused on, because like, wait, is Hugo the lawyer or is he both, or is he can be both, quite frankly. But right now they're trying to decide how to handle the news, how it's going to influence the stock, all those sort of things. By the way, I don't know if it was in this episode or it might have been the previous one. There's a moment where they're trying to figure out about the obit for Logan or something, and I kept thinking, wouldn't they have that prepared all this time for him, like all news organizations do? But maybe because it's him, they wouldn't have done it. Because of his own ego, being like, "Well, I'm immortal," whatever. Anyway, the communications, they present two possible plans of how to proceed. One, which I love, is called Operation Embalm Lenin. Yeah. Which is the nice, safe choice. We build him up. It's all about the family. We see photos. The name on the paper. Whatever. Go about it that way, or they can just shit all over Dad. And in the moment, they reject that. They said they're gonna be the above board route. You know, they're gonna burnish, not tarnish. You know, and so my question before I say anything else. I mean, especially if you happen to click and you see, depending on if you're watching it live or you're watching it on HBO Max, you always are. I think I personally am. I'm always aware of how much time is left in an episode of whatever I'm watching, and if I see there's a significant amount of time still left, I'm going, I don't think that's where this is gonna go. Did you have that same thought as well? Because I was kind of like, I don't know about that. Because what we said earlier.
I had the feeling that Kendall was way too agreeable in the room, and throughout all of this, he's always wanted to talk. I mean, he's the guy that wears you the hell out with wanting to talk the shit out of everything, and he was way too agreeable, way too quick. Now I wasn't sure like it would quite go the dark route it does. But I did not think that was the end of at least him having machinations about what to do.
Well, the great touch that they do, because one of the hardest things to convey in any story in a way that doesn't feel contrived is when you see something that's not, especially something that's not necessarily spoken, and you realize what is the thought occurring to a character or a realization. Sometimes it could even be an epiphany. It could be something much more minor, or just, an admission to oneself, even if it, again, not spoken. And they do it here, and they do it very well. And so the credit goes to the writing, the acting, the directing, and the way it's shot.
Absolutely.
It's when he's looking, and it's not some amazing, wow, people are going to be talking about that shot. Not at all. But it's it's editing also. It's Kendall looking at, and we realize he took a picture of the document. It's on his phone, and he's looking at it, and he's looking at that one part, and that's when I knew, and I think we all knew. So no pat on the back for me this week. He knows that's a cross out and not an underline. It's a cross out. I mean, once we see it really clear, like, no. That's a cross out. There's too many letters with pencil through it. I was like, that's a cross out. And that's when you realize, oh, he's going to change what he just said. He's going to go right back on that. And we see him going to Hugo, and he basically wants Hugo to go the, what's the phrase I was like, the slash and
shit all
burn.
Over dad.
Yeah. The shit all over dad one. And Hugo, he seems rather taken aback, and he doesn't. And also the fact that he want to do it in a way where to keep his hands clean from it. That's not him, which sounds so very familiar.
Hey, Tom, go take care of Carrie.
Exactly. And that's where he brings up the conversation he had with Hugo earlier, and he references it in a way where he references the strap on.
Absolutely.
And the look on Hugo's face where he realizes, oh, I don't have a way out of it with Kendall here, because he knows because he is now going to have to be until something weird changes. He is now going to have to be at Kendall's beck and call, because that's the unspoken blackmail is right there, And like I said, it's a page from his dad's playbook. And the fact that we've seen Logan do this a few times this season already, whether it be what you just mentioned about with the Kerry situation, or when he wanted Roman to get rid of Jerry, it's always, give it to someone else to do. Because again, one of the things about having such power is delegating and keeping yourself, removed from it, so you can't blow back on you or something.
Yeah, you can inflict immense pain. You just don't have to experience it yourself.
Right. And that is the end of that episode. And I got to say, now, look, whenever any series has like one of those much talked about, pop culture zeitgeist, wow episodes, it's always hard to follow it. Doesn't matter what the series is. So one had to know or had to expect there to be some level of come down from the previous one. What I love about a show like this and what made that episode so unique from last week is that why that episode is so significant is it may be one of the most extended emotional episodes of Succession. Whereas you've had major emotional moments, whether it be Kendall breaking down with his siblings at the end of season 3, or with his dad back at the end of season 1, and a few others sprinkled here and there. This was multiple characters all dealing with the death of a somewhat loved one, depending on how you want to look at it, and how it impacted so many different people. But the fact that you could have another episode, and we all noticed that, outside of those opening shots, the little, you call it the mini montage of, the three of them the next day, everything takes place in this townhouse. Much like almost everything took place either in the airplane or the party boat last week until we got to the end of it, whatever. But this was even more self-included because it all took place just in that one building. Again, so many different rooms, so many different areas. It can't call it a bottle episode, but it has the feeling of a stage play still. And as they go from room to room, it's really, where was it? Was that the fourth episode of the season, right? It's rare to see a show firing on all cylinders, episode after episode going into its final season. I mean, obviously we can think of a few, but this is one of the more complex ones, and I'm really impressed with what they've been doing so far.
Yeah, I am too. And my final thought on the episode is there's a line I made a note that I think is, I think it was a portend of things to come, and that is Kendall says to Stewie, "This deal has to get done. I can't live in a haunted house."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I think, if you game this out that Kendall decides he likes being his dad and wants to blow up the deal and not sell and run the company, that he ends up living in that haunted house with his dad, the ghost of his dad, still lingering over him and striving to seek the love or become the man that his dad was. And, I thought that the final shot of him was rather ominous.
Yeah.
In a way they've never shot Kendall. So it's going to be really, interesting to see him change his relationships with Shiv and with Roman and see how that plays out, because we've loved up until this episode, we've loved having the trio together so much, and that's going to probably start splintering next episode.
Well, I mean, it's started, as far as I'm going to start splintering this episode. Well, once they boxed her out of the deal, that's already broken her, and what he just did basically went directly against what Roman wanted.
Yes.
Do we actually think Roman? I mean, I don't know. I don't remember if I saw it in the trailer for the next episode or not. I would find it somewhat hard to believe that Roman wouldn't either know or at least suspect that Kendall had to be behind it, because Roman knows his dad, and so Roman should be able to foresee this is what that Kendall played a part in this. So that might the fracture there might already be happening, but I don't know. We'll see.
And imagine that as part of this hit piece, like there's a thing that comes out that he abused Roman.
They could go there. That would not be shocking. Okay, so great episode, and now let us turn the page. Oh wait, the page has a chapter at the top of it. It says chapter 15. That means we must be talking about Perry Mason. Now, this episode had at least 2 really excellent things going for it. Some truly great and fun character interactions, and we get puzzle pieces finally fitting together as some secrets are revealed, answers are either given or at least alluded to, leaving for quite a setup for the finale next week. But before we get to the finale, we need to start at the beginning, or maybe we're starting one day later because we actually start the episode off with a brief flash forward of a bedraggled duo of Perry and Pete trudging out of the water onto the beach. From the way we're looking at it, it implies they just survived some calamity at sea or something. But unlike shows like Breaking Bad, we go the more time-honored route of one day earlier, as opposed to having no sense of how far into the future or past this opening tease might be. And I thought you appreciate it. And now, because I didn't make a note of it, but I'm just remembering now. Do we get the opening title credit? Are they walking in front of the words Perry Mason? Is that how they do it in this one?
Yes.
Okay. So then we cut to, like we said, one day earlier. It's Milligan and Strickland, and they're toasting. And it's clear to anyone not named Milligan that Pete isn't happy with what he's done. Especially when you hear the mention of his loyalty to the office, because all that does is really speak to his betrayal of Perry Mason. And because we already saw that little flash forward, and then we go right to Pete with Milligan here, we can already surmise that, okay, this is going to be a very Pete Strickland heavy episode, which pleases the fuck out of me, because he is far and away one of the best characters on this show. Every scene he's in is fun to watch. Yeah,
he's got a real lived-in feel to him that is somehow both comforting and but yet you don't completely trust him. He's kind of a lovable rogue.
Yeah, I also find him one of the more interesting characters because he's the one character I can refer to as being both equally comedic and tragic at the same time. Totally. Certainly more so than anyone else on the show.
Totally.
The closest you even get to that might be Berger, maybe. So we then go to a scene in the judge's chambers, and we see that Milligan is being smug, and the judge is exasperated. Hamilton clearly just wants to wrap everything up. And then we have Perry. And Perry, there's no getting around that what he did in the eyes of the law was wrong. It does make you wonder why he was sitting on that evidence the entire time, because Della or Drake certainly would have said, you're going to have to bring that to the judges and to everyone's attention here, regardless of the impact it was going to have on the case. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to do what's right. I mean, just the way Drake stepped up with the information about the gun and the things that Della has done. Again, I think they all share some level of culpability, especially Della, quite frankly. But as I say, end of the day again, wow. I'm going to say it anyway. At the end of the day, it's Perry's name on the office door. It's Perry is the one making that final decision. So he's the one who has to, pay the possible consequences here. But he knows he did the wrong thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he's doing the same thing the other side does, and that is saying he's doing the wrong thing for the right reason. Right.
So at the office, he gets a call from Pete. Look at that. We're gonna get another scene with Pete. So much Pete. Pete. You're not gonna get petered out on this episode. So much Pete. Anyway, they meet on a bridge. No metaphor there. And they end up having they have a conversation. I believe there's a phrase called a pussy punch.
Yeah.
Now, there's something I want to say, and part of this is also directed at one listener. We find out that remember EB? EB's birthday was actually the combination of the safe, which apparently Pete had known in the past. So, friend of this podcaster and the podcast itself, my friend Adrian, had asked me about this the week before. How is Pete able to break into that safe? And my answer to her was simply, I'm thinking he can just break into any safe. Apparently it's just chains he has an issue with. So I want to thank this episode for actually answering her question in a much more reasonable and logical way than me trying to go, no, they didn't make a mistake. It's fine. So I thought that was kind of funny. Like, you didn't even change the combination? I worked for that guy for years. He was probably the one popping things in the safe himself half the time. No wonder he would know the combination,
Yeah, I like that touch, and this show does a good job of adding those little touches.
Right. And of course, their conversation quickly becomes about the betrayal, and then they have a fight. It's quite a fight.
Oh yeah.
There's even puke involved. And I like it by the time the fight goes on even longer than I think we realize it's going to go on for. But eventually, when the fisticuffs end, I love Pete going, so what are we going to do about the case? Because he's automatically like, okay, I know I need to make this up to you. I need to also alleviate my own conscience as well by trying to help you here. But Perry, doesn't believe there's anything that can be done. He just thinks he's going to get this barred and thrown in jail. And I like, Pete's like, that's it. It doesn't sound like you. And then we get that little tease for whatever the next scene's going to be about. Oh, there is a long shot, dun, dun, dun. Now, earlier, for those who listen to the Succession part of this podcast, you might remember I said that we had this nice little Deadwood-like moment in Succession with the, people making a deal. I gotta say, the fight scene here, it's very Deadwood-esque. I mean, the only thing missing was someone either losing an eye or a life. But other than that, the way it just goes on, and there's moments of kind of brutality, and quite frankly, throwing in the puke felt, it's like, because of all the shows we've watched over the last 25 years, if someone said, all right, if there's a fight scene, which show is most likely to have someone puke during or after? It's like, probably Deadwood.
Yeah. You almost expect Perry's wife to pull up and get out of the car and Pete to say, welcome to fucking Los Angeles.
With an accent, which strangely is. Anyway, so at the office, our usually intrepid trio is about to become a foursome, but not without some contentiousness. Now, it's interesting how that whole scene plays out. You got the stuff between Pete and Drake and why is the way it is, because I think I was about to say end of the day again. Wow. That's a really easy phrase to keep falling into. Wow. It's my, let me just say, because one recollects, among other things, Drake is pinning what he did to Perkins on Pete, because Pete got him to go to do that. And we follow the dominoes. It's not just that he was responsible for what he did to Perkins. That ultimately leads to what he ends up doing to that Ozzie Jackson guy. So the first domino that led to how screwed up Drake has been feeling as of late is Pete. And that's one of the reasons he kind of wants to beat the crap out of him. Am I right? Is Drake the first one to throw out a somewhat racial epithet?
Yeah, he calls him a cracker. And Strickland says, "What the fuck did you just call me?"
So I'll give him credit, because he figured if someone's gonna pop out a word that people are gonna react to, he figured it would be the other way around. So I was like, all right then. Very interesting. And then also the way that Della reacts to him, whatever, although Della and Perry, the two of them, be like, you've got your own moral conflicts going on from time to time, including the gun in the safe in the first place. So, maybe settle yourselves a little bit there.
Yeah, for sure.
So then we get this scene, which is, I don't know, I guess we know this seems to be a very important, interesting moment. It's Camilla and Lydell, and they're meeting with these what we surmise to be these Japanese emissaries about some upcoming or future potential major business deal. We don't really know much on the specifics of it here. I mean, we get some subtitles when we realize, oh look, Camilla can speak Japanese, because I'm pretty sure Lydell can't. But it's not something to worry about. By the time we get to the end of the episode, it becomes clear, this is part of those puzzle pieces we're talking about that are going to fall into place. It's equally clear that Camilla and Lydell at this point in time, they are not big fans of each other. Especially the way he feels about her, apparently. It's a very tense, angry little moment for him with her, which we don't know quite why he would react to her this way at this moment. Again, we kind of find out.
Yeah.
And then when we know that, then it's one of those, I kind of want to go back and watch that. Yeah.
It's a great commentary on the time that she needed a face to do business because people wouldn't have done business with her. And that when she discusses her relationship with Lydell later with Fipsy, again, she says, like, I think maybe he's becoming a problem.
Right.
So, there's a big bad behind the big bad. And, we thought Lydell was the end of the big bad train. And we find out he's a cog in the machine. He's not the machine.
Yeah. He's a big cog.
Yeah.
But still a cog.
Absolutely.
So after that, and we'll definitely delve more into that as we get into the more chronological order of events here. But first, Della visits Ham, and she's concerned. She's initially rebuked, as if this was some sort of ploy. But we do find out, as I think someone has said, he's being blackmailed.
This one's on you. You got this right.
Now, he doesn't know by who. I have a theory who it is. I'm going to say I'm like 90-something% sure I'm going to be right about it. I want to wait till later in the podcast to say it, because there's a scene which made me go, oh yeah, it's Scott. I will be shocked if I'm wrong about that. Maybe and again, it may not be that deduction. Maybe every other viewer has figured out the same thing as I did. But I'm going to wait. But you probably know who it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a great episode because Della breaks through his defenses and gets him, like, he almost resigns and gives in, and I like how he just sort of opens the door and just throws the pictures at her.
Right. Because initially he wants her to let it go, and I love when the thing with Della is it's both the ultimate critique and the ultimate compliment, even if they never mean it that way. Or maybe it's the ultimate backhanded compliment is really the way to phrase it. Because he says, she's getting just like Mason, I was like, wait, that's not the first time someone said she's kind of acting or thinking or speaking or whatevering like Mason. Interesting. But I think he makes a reference to letting the feds handle it.
Yes.
And then she goes, whoa, why would the feds have anything to do with this? Now, was that just an accidental reveal on his part? Or did he actually open the door to something just a little bit? It's like, all right, I'll give you this little scrap. You go run, like the three of you are more 3 PIs than you are lawyers anyway. Go ahead. That's what I was thinking. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's everything we've seen about him indicates he's a very measured, careful politician who plays chess in everything he does.
Right.
Even with her in this scene, I think, and the situation he's in, he can't solve. As local law enforcement, the only way it could be solved outside of him would be the feds. And, if Della can provide a push or if it could help her case in some way that helps him, I think he slips that out there so that there can be plausible deniability on his part about the ultimate truth, but maybe she could get a little further down the road and it also help him.
Right. And also, just to be clear, in case it wasn't for anyone listening, we're referring to the actual case when we talk about the feds and their involvement, not his blackmail situation.
Right.
Yeah. Berger's not going to anyone else with those photographs.
No.
I don't know about nowadays, but in 1933, there ain't no way he would do that, because that would still spell the end for him. So we then go over to Camilla and Fipsy, and you see there's a sense of these issues between them. I got to give the show credit. If I can figure things out there, then there'll be things I'm like, huh. It wasn't until around this scene I was like going, I think there may be more up with Fipsy here. I didn't I will admit the big thing we find out later on had not occurred to me at this moment. I wish I could say it had, but it hadn't. But just the way he's acting here, and and also when she finally says, "I wonder if there's room for Della Street in our office," which is a really interesting thing. So then he goes, okay, what are her intentions where Della is concerned? I kind of sort of think there might be a little bit more there, based on what we've seen, but she's, maybe she's a bit more careful about it, maybe she's a dabbler. I don't know. But the whole scene and it gives the actor who's what's his name is Wallace, I forget his last name, but we know him from several comedies over the last 40 years, from Larry Sanders and a bunch of other things. I like that it gives him we're giving him a little bit more dramatic stuff to do here, and you realize there's a certain pain with that character, and we think it's just from the pain of having to be the minion for Camilla, as we realize there's things that he's done on her behalf, and I think we realize some of them in a big way later on. But then when we fill in the thing with the wife later, it's again, I'm not going to go back and rewatch any episode. I don't think anyone else is either. But it makes you kind of think about the way he handled those short little scenes before, and maybe there's a lot more meaning to them. Like when he ran into Della in front of the house the other episode, and he says he's going to go back to his wife, his real wife, whatever. And we were just going on about, it's him referencing his relationship with Camilla. But now that we know by the end of this episode what the story is with his wife, that takes on a different light, I think.
Right, and an urgency that we weren't aware of before.
Right. So then we get one of my favorite moments in the episode. We get Pete and Perry showing up to see Holcomb, who's got his eyes on a ship there. I love the little nasty bits between Pete and Holcomb, and you realize, oh, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
That kind of because you can imagine at one point in time, these two guys were probably, two kind of sort of not the most up and up guys on the police force working together, except, Pete probably didn't want to go much further with that, and he left the force. Meanwhile, Holcomb just became probably one of the most corrupt people on the force.
Right.
But their eyes are on a ship that's swarming with inspectors. They're loading produce, and they realize it's supposed to be headed to the port of Japan. But we're still wondering where and why they're dumping produce. And Pete has the idea they can sneak on his deckhands. The only problem is Perry has to lose that leather jacket. I will confess, the way I am, I kept wondering, wait, is he really just going to throw it away? Or did he leave it? Is there a car or a motorcycle nearby? Can he put it there? Because that's a sweet leather jacket, man. I want
super sweet.
I hope he didn't. I hope he didn't have to get rid of it. Because that would really, or at least hide it somewhere you can find it later on. I mean, it's a leather jacket, man. It's not like he ain't rich. Okay, so they get on. What am I talking about the leather jacket? They're on the ship. The boat eventually stops. And I'll admit I got a little fuzzy for a second there what was going on, but then when I rewound it and watched it again, I was like, okay, now I'm clear on what's happening. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. So basically, they pull up alongside another boat, and it looks like this is like a transfer point where, so their boat, the ship that had been filled with produce, they're just dumping all that over the side. And in the cargo hold or whatever you want to call, whatever the container was of the ship, that held the produce, I would guess, they're now, through these, massive tubes and whatever, they are putting oil onto the ship.
Yes.
Okay. And it's one of those things where you're kind of a little confused, and then it's like, okay, so the produce is basically bullshit. They're just bringing oil to Japan. But at this point in time, we're like, okay, why are they doing that in a way that's like under the table? What's the story here? But again, we do come to find that out later on. Their original plan was to take a lifeboat back. And then they realized, hey, you know what? Lifeboats in this boat, they're massive.
40 people.
What they thought it was going to be like a little rowboat or something? So they're going to have to swim back, and it's going to be a long swim. And that's what catches up with the flash forward at the start of the episode. And it's really funny how they do. I love how, if I'm not mistaken, that, because it's at night where all this is happening, of course. And you're like, you can see the shore from here. It's like an hour away. And we know, as we saw in that flash forward, like, No, the sun is up and then some.
Yeah.
Because you gotta realize, how many hours must they have been swimming to get back to shore?
What's probably a good thing they had those ridiculous life preserver, things. So
So beyond that, we get a nice little scene between Clara and Paul while he's on his little surveillance duty. At the end of wow, I do fall into that phrase all the time. Wow. Paul is sorry. Paul is tired. Clara is awesome.
yeah.
That's basically my summary. And that is not written down. I just came up with that just now. Oh, at the end of the day, indeed. I should make
Clara's awesome.
I'm going to retitle the podcast at the end of the day. So, Lydell. So Lydell, he's got the press clippings about his son. And I always have the little thoughts like, did he actually snip those himself? Or, anyway. But he has, but it's those things I wonder about. I'm sorry. He has a flashback memory. We've got a flash forward in this episode. Now we get a flashback. And it's this little scene, a confrontation to a certain degree with his son. And it opens with that he wants to send him off to Havana to avoid dealing with that subpoena that he had received. But Brooks was not all about throwing away the produce. He wanted to, at least do something so that, could get into the hands and mouths and stomachs of, at least people who needed it. I mean, there would be money involved, but at least it wouldn't be going to waste. We also learned through this scene that he actually has nothing to do with whatever this illegal oil business is that his father is dealing with. And in this scene, we're led to think, oh, wow, Lydell had something to do with his son's death? Ooh, and because that is where they're trying to direct us. And then after that, we have Della investigating Brooks's dealings with Charlie Goldstein, the produce guy whose head got squashed. And she finds out at, I believe it's like the Office of Agriculture, which is, a federal office, feds, that they that's where she finds out they had both been subpoenaed. And it looks like she's going to get even more information when the agent she's working with leaves the room. It looks like he's going to go get that file for her. But after a very long wait, someone else shows up, a different Fed, pretty much saying, you can go.
Yeah, he ain't coming back.
Oh, yeah. That guy's gone to Havana, probably.
Yeah.
Now, whatever this, scam or scandal is, it starts to come into focus as Perry gets her call and he starts to work it out with Pete and Marion, the secretary, who actually hits upon the best theory, which can lead Perry and us here on the podcast to lay it all out. That Brooks and Goldstein were selling the excess produce on the black market, so people can actually eat it. The illegal oil that his father was loading those boats, up with and sending up to Japan. Well, there's an embargo against Japan right now. So this may be, I'll use the word literally, this oil may be literally fueling the Japanese military. So the dude is breaking the law. And even though obviously we're several years before, America's at war with Japan, there's still something that's kind of sort of treasony about this, if I'm not mistaken. And all of this, as we're watching it, reasoned out, it starts to add up to why Lydell would have had his son murdered. And probably also why, well, not probably, definitely why Goldstein was also murdered. At least that's what we're thinking as we're watching, which is why I think this is such a genius fucking episode. We do get a little thing where Clara and Paul are following the car. Finally, we get it's the blue sedan with the woman inside it. I like that she comes up with the obvious idea of to pretend to be a maid, and he doesn't want her to do that. I love that. That's very smart. That's very just kudos to the writers on that one. It's like, okay, I get why you did that. That's very smart.
Well, and I like the idea that she's like, you can't be the one that goes up to the door.
Oh no,
like her sense of practicality, really shines in this episode.
Oh yeah, and even though we all know why, the fact that we get a 1933 Karen moment a little later.
That's exactly what I wrote in my notes. I was like Beverly Hills Karen.
Oh my God, absolutely. And I also love that the initial plan is that she's going to pretend to be a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
And I was like, as someone, I have to say, as someone who for 11 or 12 years, where I lived before where I live now, which is actually just 3 blocks away, directly around the corner is a hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. So yes, they came to the door at least once or twice. Not too many times because you don't want to poison the neighborhood that you live in and keep bothering people over and over. But it happened twice in those 11 years, where I even said to them, "Is it a good idea for you to be knocking on the doors of people who live right around the corner? Shouldn't you give the rest of us some space or something? Just some advice, whatever." So she goes to the door. And she's, whoever is inside just says to come in, whatever. And that's when we see, and I guess we should have known this, or I should have known this, or whatever. I don't want to speak for you or anyone else, because they kept referring to her as a hophead or whatever. But the woman is a total junkie. And she's got the tubing around her arm. She's obviously already, has injected, and she believes Clara is Josephine Baker, which, okay. She looks nothing like Josephine Baker. But, anyway. And then she goes into convulsions. Now, I kept thinking about if she should do anything or not. Because I kept thinking, oh, you should. But how do you explain? Because if the authorities are involved, you can't tell them. The Jehovah's Witnessing ain't going to work then.
Right.
And then, of course, her being a woman, the fact that she's a woman of color to boot, and there's a drug thing going on with this woman, she'll somehow get wrapped all into it herself, because that's how they'll perceive her.
They'd probably blame her for bringing the drugs.
Absolutely. They'll think she's more like a courier than anything else, or a dealer even, perhaps. So, I don't need to bounce around. So, but eventually what happens is, the man of the house comes home, and it's the lawyer.
It's Fipsy.
Fipsy. And that, for me, that was one of my, kind of moments. And, I mean, not the biggest one in this episode, but, second one. And she does manage to get out of the house without being seen. And while he's freaking out and calling for an ambulance and so on, whatever, she jumps in the car and they drive off. So we get to Lydell. Lydell and his grandson are, shooting stuff, because that's what rich people do. Or people in your neck of the woods, Brian, I guess they
skeet.
Yeah, well, yeah, when they're there, they just, beer cans shoot, whatever. Anyway. So Perry shows up, and does Perry tell him that he's just returning something you dropped while the kid is still there, or has the kid already been sent away at that point? I can't remember.
I think I could be wrong. I think he tells him originally, and that's why Lydell sends the kid away.
Yeah, I think so too. I just, because I didn't really make a note of that. So I just remember. So Perry kind of insists that he, Lydell uses influence on Berger to get him to offer a better deal for his clients. Otherwise, either he's going to go public to the feds and the media, whatever, with all the information he has, or if something happens to him, that information it's going to go to those places regardless. That's the classic, in the event of my death, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's a time-worn one, but I don't mind it. But there's something about the way Lydell reacts and the way he's talking back to him that makes you think there's something more going on here. There's something that tells you that maybe Lydell didn't do it after all. And I took things out of order because it's right after that then that's when we see that Fipsy is the one whose wife it is, and that's supposed to be layering in how the reveal that's about to come. So
right.
Because when we bounce back, we have Perry basically saying, "How are you not to blame for his death?" And he very simply, answers, "Because I didn't want it. God damn it,
Yeah.
then who did? We cut to Camilla playing, who basically plays piano and plays out the rest of the episode, which I thought another nice little touch.
Yeah, and I think there's a really, really sort of cruel irony to the fact that Lydell and Brooks were caught up in her web.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the number one thing he did not want exposed about Brooks was his perversity in his mind. And there's little doubt that with all Lydell knows and his power, that he also knows Camilla is living an alternative lifestyle, and that he would probably find it extremely morally repugnant to have to be doing business with her and to be kowtowing to her.
Right.
Which is why I think in the one moment with the Japanese businessman, he basically tells her to fuck off. When she suggests building a monument to Brooks and his generosity and
but it's so obviously But when we see what happens, this reveal makes that so much more like ugh.
Yeah.
Ugh, wow. And then, but it's at this point you start putting things together, because if she's the one who is ultimately behind the stuff, that makes Fipsy the one who's probably her emissary to like, he's the one who would have went to, I would assume, who went to go pay these men off to do the actual killing, whatever. Because it wouldn't be her hands. She's Logan Roy, man. She ain't gonna be the one doing this stuff.
Right.
So, and that's where his moral conflicts have come into play, and which informs what his performance has been this season.
Right.
And speaking of those fellows who are taking the rap for all this, the Gallardos, and I don't know if I skipped over them earlier by accident,
you did.
Whatever. I'm not going to worry about it because I don't really care, because I'll mention it here. They're in prison. The mom had dropped by earlier because we find out, other than her still feeling they were idiots and stupid for doing what they did, she also points out that there was hope on the horizon for them, especially for his younger brother, because he had actually gotten accepted to a prestigious art school. And she leaves it up to him, the other brother, whose name for some reason just...
Mateo.
Thank you. Bounced out of my head there. Whether or not to tell him. And in the little mini montage we get while Camilla's playing piano, we see that Rafa has returned from the hole that he had been thrown into in a previous episode. And he's not handling it very well. He's not in a good way at all. And then we see Mateo crumple up that letter that this news is not going to help him. It's not going to help him. The thing I alluded to without anyone picking up on it or not, I don't know, but I'm going to do it now. During this montage, we see a moment in the judge's chambers. This is what I was talking about. And we see it was that brief that the judge wanted written up about how to go about, we were going to put up charges against Perry Mason about the evidence that had been suppressed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's that little moment between Milligan and Berger, and I think Milligan might even pat Berger on the back, I think, during the scene.
Yes.
And that's when I wrote, Milligan is blackmailing Berger. I'm going to go with that until proven otherwise. I'm saying Milligan's the one blackmailing Berger.
Well, I mean, if Nygaard wants to keep her criminal empire going, and I think we've seen throughout the show, you and I have commented that the Berger character, you might not agree with him, but he seems to have like a sense of right and wrong, mm-hmm. and what justice he even says, what justice should look like to the public. Milligan might be a little more malleable to the powerful Camilla Nygaard. And I think he very well could have used her services to blackmail Hamilton to get him to step down and try to be her instrument of power in the DA's office.
I mean, I know in many ways the easy answer is just that, she's behind everything else and she must be behind this as well. And she very well may be part of it. But I'm going all the way. I'm saying he's part of that, because it ultimately, who does it also help? It helps him. So again, it was just my thinking. I could be wrong. hey, we haven't gotten to do a lot of theorizing on any shows that we talk about on this podcast. You know, we missed the Lost craze by a decade.
Yes.
So it's so we either be right or wrong. I mean, you know, got to take a swing here. And then at Camilla's, we see that Fed who had, you know, pretty much froze Della out at the agriculture office. He stops by. For some reason, he stops by with photos of Della there. He could have just said, hey, that Della Street was there. Okay. So someone else, like, behind your shoulder, like, took pictures of her sitting in the office. Wow. But that's when she says, get me Phipps on the phone. And that is actually the end of the episode. Not sure how well that phone call is going to go since Phipps is kind of busy right now.
Right.
But I liked the reveals. It made me go, you know, there's a reason you went and you got Hope Davis to play a part in this season. So she plays a much more significant part than we might have first initially thought, which makes sense because of the level actress that she is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the next one is going to be a season finale or might end up being a series finale. I've not heard if this show has been renewed. The way things go in the land of television nowadays, I'm always going to assume it's not being renewed until we hear otherwise. But I'm very curious about how there are still enough other mysterious elements at work here, and I want to see how it all plays out, of course.
Well, I have more hope for Perry Mason by the very fact it's on HBO. Mm-hmm. They tend to be less stringent than, say, Netflix or Amazon, who basically seem to be giving everything but the greatest sensations one season and canceling. And I mean, we were encouraged by season 2. I think this has been a strong outing. What I'm really looking forward to, and if next week is the last episode of the season, is I think the piece you and I have missed is we still haven't seen Sam Ganji again, Sean Astin.
Oh, right. You're right.
Like, I wonder, is he coming back in the last episode, and is he one of the power players involved, to take over the produce department store world? Maybe not. We theorized he probably would be, but we haven't seen him again. If this is the last episode, I'm kind of thinking that we may have made more of that and we won't see him again. But it would be another interesting peel of the onion to say there's another player here that we missed. I'm gonna
go in a slightly different direction than that, but picking up on your idea, but taking it somewhere that I want to go. I'm going to say that he's not going to actually play that kind of a part in it, but as one of the things that this series seems to very, very much emulate and want to be, like anything that's done in the last 40 odd years that's noirish and takes place in Los Angeles and it's in the 30s or whatever. What they're going to do, what I'm going to predict. Oh man, if this comes true, oh man, I'm going to drop my podcast mic and I'm never going to record again because it's like I'll never be better than that. So you may know I'm a little fan of this movie called Chinatown, right? And one of the little things I really enjoyed about Chinatown is at the very beginning of Chinatown, there's a scene with one of Jake's clients, played by Burt Young before Rocky. And it's just something we see in the very opening scenes, and then we think, okay, we're never going to see that guy again. But then there's a reason, because they need a way to get out of a situation. And even though it's a couple hours later, they bring back that character just to help them in a specific situation, blah, 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 blah. I think there's going to be something very specific that the Sean Astin character can do that they need some sort of help in, that be it his connections, whether connections to produce or whatever it is, somehow they're going to utilize him in a way to help them, not in a Deus Ex Machina kind of way, but because he's been part of the show already, but somehow he's going to play a more significant part. Because I don't want to think that all the stuff with him was just to give us information about Perry's character and how even of trying to avoid criminal cases, he still has to deal with, the unethical and kind of rotten people regardless. I feel like that would, I'll be okay with it, but I'll be a little disappointed by it. But if they can still utilize him to play a significant part, even if it's just one thing for the overall story of the season, that would be very satisfying for me. And that's so I'm going to make it like it's the Burt Young from Chinatown thing. Although obviously he's a different class than that character was, where in the last like half hour or something's going to come up and they'll hit upon who do we go to that can help us with this situation. And that's who they're going to use. That's my weirdo. That's my crackpot thing. Oh, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
It's not trademark.
Okay.
No, I mean, even if it's, I mean, my thought was, along what you're saying is even if they use him to say, your chief competitor was Goldstein and, what were the business practices that you were concerned about? Well, there was a rumor he was getting stuff on the black market and, just something like that.
No, absolutely. The produce connection. The most likely thing has to be a connection to the whole produce situation. Now, how that, again, the funny thing about this, I was going to say at the end of the day yet again, there's all these things going on, but and I'm curious to see, can we still get away from the fact that the gun was held in the hands by one of these kids and that happened, or a guy, whatever? Or not. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a reveal like, oh, and it turned out they didn't fire the gun after all. Although that would be an amazing reveal. But it's interesting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how they wrap it all up.
The split the baby is one of them takes the blame, i.e. Mateo, and saves Rafa.
Yeah, I could see it being that. I could see them going that way.
But this show hasn't taken the easy way out. It didn't last season, and
no.
I still think it won't. But, hey, exciting to look forward to the last episode and exciting to talk more about Stephen Root.
There you go. And that's what we're going to do right now. Because we are going to talk just a little bit, because I see the hour. I know what time it is. We got to talk about the premiere of Barry. Barry's final season started same night, Succession. It's on Sundays. It came back. 2-episode premiere for its final season, no less. It was an episode I think the first episode was titled Yikes.
Yeah.
Something I have typed many a time, quite frankly. And the second one was Bestest Place on the Earth. Not Bestest Place on Earth. I like the Earth being in there. So, I would say it was quite the premiere. Although I gotta take a minute or two to make an observation here, and I feel like I might have talked about this before, but it's probably been a while, so I'm allowed to repeat myself a little bit. Especially when you combine these two episodes, it's really getting harder and harder to rationalize calling Barry a comedy. Because outside of the rival warring gangs meeting at like a Dave and Buster's, or a few of Gene's little flourishes here and there, there's really very little to laugh at in either of these episodes. Now, however, let me take this a little further. Now, the idea of a comedy or a dramedy, I guess, that's been going around for 40-odd years. You can trace it back to some episodes of MASH. Then there was a couple of them that came about in the later 80s. The day, what was it? Like the Days and Nights of Molly Dodd or Molly Brown, whatever. Frank's Place was another one. I mean, we saw these other shows occasionally be that way, or they would have these very caustic, serious things that would happen in them. Hell, even Larry Sanders Show occasionally could be like that. One can say some of the later shows, and once we get into the 2000s, have elements of that, but I kind of push back on that a little bit. But there's been something that's been going on for the last few years, where a lot of comedies are following this kind of model where it's like, is that really a comedy? I mean, I guess so. It's sort of, The Bear is one of those shows. Barry is one of those shows. Quite frankly, Hacks is kind of like one of those shows. And there's at least a few others that
Atlanta.
Atlanta, thank you. That's the one I was trying. I was drawing a blank on the goddamn title of all things. Atlanta is certainly one of those. So I just find it interesting because the most memorable things from like all these shows I just mentioned are almost never comedic. They're almost always something dramatic, whatever. And probably some of the best dramatic performances and writings that we've seen in the last few years are on shows like that, more so than your standard full-length dramatic series, whatever. I mean, I was talking about that with The Bear not that long ago, because someone was saying, but is it a comedy? Because well, yeah, I don't remember really laughing much when I watched The Bear at all, but I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't funny. It was intense, but not funny. Barry, at least when it started out, especially when you have Bill Hader as your star and Stephen Root, and you have and Henry Winkler, you've got certain seasoned performers in the comedy field. Even the original Cops were kind of played in a very silly way, I think, initially before she was murdered, I guess, whatever. But at this point, I mean, yeah, you get Gene has kind of been toned down for the last couple of seasons ever since the murder. Although in one of these episodes he puts on a performance for the ages, quite frankly.
Yes, a one-man show.
And I get, and even Hank, who can be quite silly and fun and comedic, has been dealing with a lot of serious stuff. Even when he's funny, he's not. You know what I'm saying? It's just, and again, this is not at all a criticism. I just find it interesting. It's like, if you submitted this for a different category, I'd be okay with that. And right now, this show, we can call it a dramedy, whatever. And more so this season than any other season, it's gotten downright surreal. They are going places, which is like, okay, series is about to end. Bill Hader has has a blank check to do what he wants, and he is doing it. And you're either there for the ride, or you're just gonna be scratching your head, I think.
There was some 6 feet under shit in these episodes, like big time. And I found it, I don't know that it totally worked, but as I watched it, I liked the choice to sort of make some of the really, really risky moves to be like, he's sitting in a room, but it's on the beach, and you pan back and forth, and you see it's not a cut, that it looks like they probably actually built a set like that to sort of say there's this place that he goes to in his mind. I like the idea. But I really, really think the tone set in the early episodes is the show's going to take some big swings. And it has. I mean, whether we think back to the karate episode or we think back to that just bonkers chase on the highway. This show takes some big, big chances. And I think we see it doing that. And the thing I was surprised about was bringing, the love interest line back in order so quick that she can tell him that with all the disappointment in her life, she can tell him that she felt safe with him, that she always felt safe with him. I found that really, really a fascinating thing to do this early in the season. So much so that it, gives him false hope that they can possibly have a happy ending.
Right, but her doing that and also then walking away, it almost undercuts it, I think. But
Yeah, but she's a mess, man.
well, she's a train wreck of she's a train wreck on the level of the Fugitive movie from the '90s right now. It's
Yeah.
and she is losing it right and left, and to the point where what is it? Her agent essentially fires her, but says, "Oh yeah, you could probably do like a reality show because you were dating a." I love that they're calling him a serial killer, even though at this point in time, and again, I hate to say, correct me if I'm wrong. But correct me if I'm wrong. He's only in prison right now for killing the cop. They don't.
Right.
I mean, the word hasn't gotten out about everything else he's done. So I don't know where these people are leaping to the serial killer thing, because there's been no indication in the press that he's a hitman or that he's killed multiple people. I've not seen it. That's not how I read it.
But he's been arrested for her murder, and he was arrested trying to kill her dad. Like it. I mean,
oh, okay.
You know what I mean? Like there's an implication that he's
okay.
Her murder wasn't a one-off.
I'm okay. Then I'm just going to call them out then, because now you've given me carte blanche to do that, because we're playing a little free and easy with the term serial killer.
Agreed.
That is not a serial killer, people.
Agreed.
Beyond that, everything else, absolutely. Well, they had already played the idea of him going to like this other place in his mind in the previous season with all the people he had killed, and which was also on a beach, if I'm not mistaken, right? Although I got confused initially, and especially because he deliberately shoots them in very long shots, and he does that since this isn't going to be projected on a movie screen, that way you can get away with having someone as the Fuchs character, even though he's clearly much younger, and it's probably not Stephen Root who's standing there, but it's Stephen Root's voice, things like that. I didn't think that they were on a beach. I thought they were in a desert, quite frankly, because of how dry and cracked everything seemed around them. But what I wanted to say was, like, I didn't realize initially, and it's my own dumbness then, if I'm the only one who thought this, I didn't know initially these were weird little I guess, is fantasy the right word? I don't know how else to put it. His imagination. I didn't know that's what I thought. Initially, I thought, oh, are we getting memories? And I was like going, but Fuchs couldn't have known him when he was a kid. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, no. This is just, and it's Barry Barry is a man-child. And we know that because he's emotionally stunted.
Yes.
And and you can see that by the way, all seasons, the way he's spoken to his girlfriend, before and after, the way he speaks to Jean all the time. He's like a little kid hoping for his father's or mother's approval. And, and all these little scenes we're getting are kind of like informing us about that. Do they work or not? I found them fascinating.
Agreed.
So and it got it. You know what? I was all for doing anything to take me out of the prison, because the one thing I don't want this season to be. I don't want to spend I guess it's an 8-episode season.
Yeah. I
don't want to spend all 8 episodes with Barry in prison.
Agreed.
And so in one of the episodes when they start talking about possibly breaking him out, I was like, oh, okay, I'll follow that storyline, whatever. Or maybe there might be a deal to be made, even though I can't imagine, how that would work. But now they actually want to kill him. I don't know how that would work. Here's the thing about taking a big swing. And I'll say here's the biggest swing the show is taking. And you might have said they've already done this in previous seasons, but I think it's even more so once we've seen the first 2 episodes of this season, more so than ever before. Maybe last season too, to a certain extent, but really more by the end of last season going through these 2 episodes. Here's the question is, how are we supposed to feel about Barry? And how are we supposed to feel about Jean? And I think that the huge chance they're taking, which is on the level of, I don't know, it's a very different thing, but we always like to use Breaking Bad as an example. Remember, we got to a point in Breaking Bad, like, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be rooting for anymore, or if that even matters anymore, or whatever. I kind of feel that way about Barry and Gene right now. I mean, Barry is so extremely damaged and whatever, but I mean, it's hard to really just go, he's a good guy. I mean, I think it's almost like he's a bad guy with a soul who just never understood, the difference between right and wrong because of what he's gone through, whether it be as a child or his wartime experiences, whatever. Gene has become, I mean, what do you make of Gene at this point? I mean, he might be Gene has become a very, much more interesting character than I ever would have given him credit for. I mean, that whole elaborate thing he does with that reporter, it's kind of insane.
Oh, it's totally insane. And like when Barry calls, he takes his call to just at the end say, like, to gloat and say, got you. The turns they've made with Sally. I mean, probably the least changed character in a way is NoHo Hank. But he sort of feels a betrayal at the end of this. But I mean, to give credit where credit's due, I thought one of the most amazing things that it sort of reminded me of, the scene in The Untouchables where they're at Dave and Buster's. Right. And Hank and his partner are walking around the table and they're talking and it follows one until they cross paths with the other and shifts and goes the other way. Like, I loved that. I loved it.
Okay. I wasn't expecting him to get hit with a bat, but I do know what you're talking about. The performance those two put on, it's like the cheesiest TED talk.
Yes.
And instead of Dave and Buster's, we're going to start with some jalapeno poppers.
Yeah. But the waitress is like hasn't even left. He's like, so we're going to kill them, But in the midst of this, it sort of insane over the top stuff, there's really interesting camera work going on. It just is great. And then they go to that room, and I like how the guy goes, no, we have this room for 30 more minutes. And they're talking about sand, going legit with sand. But it is a show that we've loved and want to see what happens. And have really been impressed by Bill Hader and the chops he's shown as a director, and I think he directed both these episodes. If I remember right.
If I'm not mistaken, I think he's going to direct all the episodes of the season.
Wow,
I think so. Well, I'm pretty sure that's the case. If I'm wrong, we'll find out. But I think I had heard ahead of time he's going to be directing all of them. The thing about Bill and the Barry character, and again, if it kind of goes alongside what I said about. How are we supposed to feel about him and taking a swing is there. The risk also is when you take your main character of whatever show you watch and you plunge them through these trials and tribulations where they are whatever, either they're a shell of their former selves or they're experiencing either be hallucinations or they're lost in their own mind or they're drifting here and there. There's always the risk that you start to put distance between them and the audience and the viewer. Right. And you can think about Don Draper in the final season of Mad Men, especially when, because he's like, okay, he's less and less Don Draper now. Now he's just roaming around the country and doing this and that and whatever. And it's like, and there's nothing wrong with that except it doesn't feel like he's our Don Draper anymore. Or when you get to, Tony Soprano and he's having these dream sequences because he's been in a coma for like 3 episodes in a row. And it's like, okay, I don't know how much time I want to spend with that. And, and there's a few other really significant examples, but again, I'm not here to list them all. I was worried that we're going to go that route with the Barry character. And we've only got 8 episodes. We just knocked off 2 of them. He's in prison. He of course had to be, because he has to, if he can't literally beat himself up other than like banging his head against the wall, which is a little bit too raging bull for me, quite frankly. Right. Then he's going to get the one guy, the one CO who probably would have been his best ally to have there to make sure he's okay. He doesn't care about being okay, and he says things in a way where he forces the issue where the guy ends up beating the holy hell out of him, where he's like, a bloody pulp at that point. I'm okay with you introducing this prison stuff and what's between him being in his own head and being beaten hell out of or whatever. But I don't want to have this go on for that many more episodes.
No, I agree.
And if hopefully they come up with a way that is believable enough and still fun or interesting to get him out of this situation, because I can't have 7 or 8 episodes of that. I just can't.
I agree. And the last thing I'll say about it is I like the turn they made for Fuchs, where he was going to screw Barry over and then doesn't after he sees Barry hurt and actually feels bad for what he's done. And I love the line where he's in with the feds. It goes, because you guys try to turn people against their friends. You're dicks.
Right.
I mean, Stephen Root's always a joy. But, there was some good emotional moments about him seeing himself sort of as a surrogate for Barry.
The last thing I guess I'll say about it is, focusing on Fuchs for a moment, is we get 2 episodes of Fuchs, and the number of times he flips back and forth between how he perceives the situation and Barry is more than... it's staggering. He goes from being scared for his life to trying to be his friend, to feeling sorry for him, to wanting to, until ultimately thinking he's been betrayed by him, because it's his call to Hank at the end, which sets that possible situation in motion. Whatever. It's interesting. We'll see where they go with all this. I honestly don't know how they'll end the season. One could assume someone's going to die. I don't know. But maybe not. Then that's what's weird, because at the end of the day, it's supposed to be a comedy, and I don't know where they go.
But you never know. I will, I will say that if I join Fuchs prison gang, I've already decided my name. Oh. My name is Long Drive.
Oh my God, that was such a great scene. If I had thought about it, quick peek behind the curtain, I wasn't sure until at some point into this podcast if we were even going to be able to fit in talking about Barry or not. I decided to do it. You might notice if you go back and listen to the beginning, I never said the shows we were going to cover for that reason. I was giving myself an out.
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked up on it, but I'm just letting everyone else know. But what was it? I wanted to respond to something you just said. What did you just say?
Oh, you were going to call me Livewire to your Jason at the beginning of the podcast?
If I hadn't gone with the Succession reference, I was totally going to use the nicknames from the Barry episode. And I said, I can't do that because I don't know if we're going to talk about Barry for sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Wow. So all right, not bad. We covered 3, 250. Not bad. Okay. So, everybody, you guys out there, if you enjoyed this podcast, God, I hope you did, you might enjoy hanging out on our podcast page as well. Our Facebook page is what it's actually called. Serious TV Drama Podcast. Like the page and join the conversation about shows like Barry, like Succession, like Perry Mason, or pretty much anything else that's TV related or even movie related. I'll let it go. Now, you can go to podbean.com to find all 376 of our podcasts. Although, as I was recently reminded, I think the audio on my end is pretty bad for like maybe the first 257 of them, so you can skip those. I listened to a little bit of one in our early years. The audio is shifting from one ear to the other. It sounds like you might have just dug up my audio from a time capsule. It was right next to like Marconi's first radio or something. Anyway, by the way, you can also find, speaking of me, you can also find Scott Forgot the 80s on podbean.com also. Just remember one T in Scott. You can find us on Instagram. Our handle there is Serious TV Drama. as one word. And of course, please follow us on Twitter. We're still there. And our handle there is at STVD Podcast. That's STVD as in Serious TV Drama. And I know I forgot to mention, gosh, guys, if you want, go on Apple Podcast, or I know you can do it on other sites. I've been told Spotify and other things also have a thing where you can rate and review things. I'm dumb. I can't find where that is. So just stick with the Apple Podcast. It's been a while. I wouldn't mind a couple nice new reviews and stars there. Unless you only give us one star, then don't do that. So we will be back next week to give a full breakdown and analysis on what will either be the season or the series finale of Perry Mason, as well as hopefully the next great episode. We hope it's going to be great because it's been great so far this season. Of Succession. I actually heard some people critiquing one of the episodes, like the second one. I was like, you idiots. And they're like media personalities. And yeah, we'll try to talk a little bit about that Barry Berkman fella as well. So, Brian, it was longer than our previous ones, but we knew it was going to happen. So thank you so much for your patience and for joining me once again this week.
Enjoyed it. Y'all have a good night.
Indeed. Thanks for listening, and good night.